welcome to our panel conversation of this year's Bsides Seattle. This is actually my first Bsides Seattle, so very happy to be here, and thank you for all the very warm welcomes actually to all of us. This is not a lot of people's first Bsides Seattle, but it's definitely not your first. But thank you for coming to listen to us. The panel discussion that we're going to have this morning, is all around hiring and retaining and scaling top security engineering teams and talent. We'll be exploring how each of these leaders, who I'll introduce in a second, approach hiring and kind of their different attraction models internally, and how they kind of have built these teams at different companies. We'll be working through some of their successes and challenges, and hopefully the goal of the session is for each and every person to have learned how these leaders approach hiring, but also if you're somebody that's looking for a job, just to think about how maybe you can drive your search with looking internally with some of these roles or externally. So I'll do a quick introduction and I'll throw it over to the rest of the team, but I'm Tom Alcock. I run a cybersecurity staffing practice called Code Red. I've been in the industry for about 6 years now, and have built teams, actually a lot of these companies that these people represent, and help early stage technology startups scale security talent, and then larger technology companies to do the same. So maybe we'd love to hear from the people that are going to share some wisdom with us. So Erika, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Erika Dean. I am the CSO at Robinhood, and I've been in the industry for roughly 26 years, so a really long time.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
No? Oh,
Yes.
Cool. Now we can. All right. Hi, I'm Kevin Hanaford. I lead trust engineering at Discord. Team that consists of security, safety, privacy, and platform engineering. I've been doing security stuff accidentally for about 10 years. Been in tech and incident management and stuff before then.
Yeah, Sacha Faust, director of security engineering for Grammarly. Been in the security since, I think professionally since around 98. So yeah, 20 plus years, maybe I'm getting old as well. And at Grammarly, I lead kind of a diversity of teams, product security, platform security, security intelligence as well. And what the name came actually at Microsoft Green Team, which is how do we fix systemic issues with several developers as well.
Thank you, and welcome. So the flow of today is we've prepared some questions that we've kind of asked that come up quite a lot, put it on Twitter and LinkedIn. So we've got some really great questions to ask our group of panelists. And we would like to leave probably 10, 15 minutes at the end. So if you've got some dying, burning questions to ask some of our leaders this afternoon, please save them for the end, and I'll open up the floor with probably 10 minutes to spare. But let's kick it off, eh? The first question that I did want to ask you, and maybe Erika, we'll start with you, but the question that I had is, what are some of the key factors and considerations that you've had when you are looking to build a security team?
Interesting that I start with how the company actually operates, because I think that one of the most important things when you're hiring is the culture of the company. So take that in consideration, plus what your priorities are. So you want to know exactly what you're trying to achieve, what your current talent state is. So if you are starting with a net of 0, it's a little bit easier because you don't have anyone to compare against, right? And you know what you want to hire for. But if you have a team already existing, you have to evaluate and understand what skill sets do you already have, and then you can build upon what you currently have as a team. The other component that I typically look at is really making sure that you understand like how you want to grow in the future, so that you know whether or not you have the room to scale. Because when you're hiring for the company, if it's a large company, you have a little bit more room to play with around development versus a more junior company that's maybe small. So you want to start off really, really tight in skill sets. So that's the kind of thing that I typically look for when I'm building a team.
Cool. Without repeating everything that Erika just said, I think one of the things that I look for really is what are the sort of biggest, most pressing problems at the moment. A lot of my career has been starting from 0 and building towards one, building teams, kind of the exact opposite of inheriting a team. And so for me, a lot of times, like, what are the core set of problems that we have? What are the most pressing of those problems? And then how do I sort of order that such that I hire the people that can fix those problems, which allow me to look at the next set of problems, rinse and repeat that process. So a lot of it for me is understand the landscape. And then while I'm hiring, hire for the culture piece, basically understanding like who can I bring here that will fit into the company, not necessarily who can just solve the problem. I think that you bring in problem solvers that don't fit, they will only be problem solvers for short periods of time. But beyond that is figure out like what the pressing problems are, hire for that, make sure you have good fit, move on to the next set of problems.
Not much to add there, but maybe, and perhaps all three of us are doing the same, is these are questions I personally ask before joining. Like, what's the mission? So for me, it really starts there, and then a little bit of selfishness there is what can I learn there, right? So once this is baked in, then everything my colleague has said is what I would look for. I tend to live a lot in the future, so like, where do you want to be in a year? And that usually align well with what I like to do. So I build for the future for the most part.
Great. And then just to tag on onto that question, like going in and going through the interview process yourself and understanding the mission and the vision of the company, just to tag on one extra thing, how soon in your journey as being a new leader would you think about hiring? Would you do that immediately, or would you kind of tag on a 90-day period just to see the lay of the land and then start hiring?
Question for me?
Yeah.
I actually think about this even before signing the deal.
Yeah.
I look at the structure. I think it's very important to, for me, at least at this point in my career, that the leadership team is a team that I feel comfortable with. Some might be known, some might be unknown, but I spend a tremendous amount of time actually getting to know them first. And very often we discuss about growth and headcount even before I sign. So that's usually where I start.
Cool.
It is interesting though. I think when I first start looking at a company, and I don't think I actually do that. I don't think I start off with actually deciding what I'm going to hire. I think what I typically do is once I get in the door, I evaluate the situation. I almost don't start hiring right away because I think that I need to understand, like, is the culture that I perceived during the interview actually the right culture that I perceived? Is the dynamics between the engineering team and the security team what I perceived it to be? And so I actually do take a little bit of time before I even start hiring so that I can understand. So I'm actually hiring for the right type of person for the role and where I want to go for my team.
I agree. Sorry if I misspoke. For me, I like to understand where they want to go, and let's have a conversation about generally, like, do you understand the cost of this, right? And I've met people say, hey, we want to go hire 10 people, and then well, how much do you think it costs? And we're completely disconnected. So I agree. Don't hire before joining. Sometimes you can, you just have some reference and you get the wheels going.
Yeah.
But I think doing a proper, as you mentioned, a proper assessment within the first, I would say, 45 day or so, sketch out a vision doc that points out, like, here's basically the current state of affairs, here's the market, here's the trade-off I believe we need to take, circulate that, and then go double down, then move. Yeah.
And I actually have seen hiring managers coming into larger organizations and try to bring in their A team before they've understood the lay of the land. And it's actually had detrimental effects because you don't know what the internal culture looks like. You don't know about some of the challenging conversations you need to have with the existing team before, or understand the landscape by bringing in your A players that are very talented, but also can upset the status quo, which can be a good thing, but certainly as you're trying to build trust within that organization, it can be a bad thing too.
Okay. And if you answer questions on some companies I've worked for, of how many people would you bring on day one, and they give you a firm answer on how many, it would have failed the interview immediately. Yeah, for that reason.
Yeah. Well, when we thought about putting this panel together, I worked with some of the founders of Bsides Seattle, and I wanted to bring a level of experience of large companies, so Capital One, some of the FANG organizations, but all of these leaders and heads of security and CISOs are currently in companies that aren't maybe Fortune 500s or in growth periods, but come from that. And so I think it was really intentional and deliberate when I thought about putting this panel together, what that looks like from a large organization and what it looks like in the current state of play. And so the next question I had for you all is, what do you think has led to your success? And you can talk about any part of your journey. It can be previous companies or where you're at now. But what do you think has led to your success in building and hiring technical security teams? Maybe Kev, will jump into you first.
Yeah, my immediate reaction to that is I like to observe and I like to learn. I also like to surround myself with people who are better at their jobs than I am, like very intentionally. And so the vast majority of my career has been like that. And having started at kind of bigger companies, like started here at Microsoft, actually the next goal ago, working Amazon, PayPal, and like a lot of these big places, being able to observe like what success looks like at scale makes it kind of allows you to put like a point in time, like in the future, like I gotta get somehow get to that point. However, I can take away like what isn't working also, so you can kind of understand like, okay, these are things that are working really well for them, especially over time at scale to get really, really large. But also I should avoid these other pitfalls. And so for me, being able to take a lot of that into smaller places, I've been at a few startups, started a couple of security teams. It's been like, I know where we are today. I know what scale looks like really far away from now, and then fit that into the confines of the company, the industry, whatever else I'm dealing with. And it helps me kind of like navigate that a lot easier than if I didn't have a good idea of like what it looks like. Like when you're trying to just chart a course in the middle of the fog, it's hard. But if you know general direction you're going, it makes a lot of decision making simpler.
I think for me, interesting enough, it's the mistakes that I made along the way that really helped me. So early in my career as a leader, I would build teams, and I thought just hiring the best talent was the right thing to do. But I quickly found that was not the case. It's why culture became such a big part of my hiring process. Because one time I hired someone, they were not a good fit for the culture, and they disrupted my entire team. It became very toxic. And then I had a problem to fix because the trust on the team was lost. No one was getting any work done. There was a lot of fighting. It just wasn't working. So for me, building great teams has become something that over time I have developed to be able to do. But it took making mistakes in order to actually find that right pattern of how do you actually identify the talent that's the perfect fit for the role. And for me, sometimes it's not even like I want to hire really fast, but I know I need to sometimes just take that time, take a step back, because it's worse when you hire someone that's not a good fit, because now you're wasting time and you should have just taken that extra couple of months to actually hire the right person.
For me, I need to see passion. I'm a passionate person. So, and passion will overcome many things. Erika makes a good point, is you learn through your mistakes. I think the management and leadership role is all case study, building your network, talking to other people and say, hey, where did you derail? Hey, I'm derailed right now, what happened, right? So I think having that introspection, which for me came late in my career, but predominantly passion and creating good synergy. I actually spend a lot of time with the candidates. I don't have the bandwidth, the scale all the time. If I need to go hire 50 people, I will be somewhat selective who I spend a lot of time with. But I also, late in the process, I encourage my team to go meet with a candidate where I'm not there. So start building that relationship early on. If you can do it, depending on policies and in recruiting and so on, you may have some constraint there. But generally, get people, get passionate people, right? And create that synergy within the team so that these things are bonding. And somebody made me realize recently that even though I don't think about bringing sort of my circle in, it tends to somewhat happen organically. And from company to company, some of them I have the pleasure to work for almost a decade, if not more. But it's snowballed over the years. Why? Because we build that relationship, right? So I think that's super important to me. And I've declined extremely lucrative offer because that connection was not possible. I had a CISO that kept sending me the offer with more money, but never gave me the time. I was like, okay, you're supposed to court me at this point. How is it going to be when we disagree? And we will disagree. I have strong opinions like many other leaders. So anyways, my short answer is go focus on passion and build teams that produce better results than what you can think of. Do not hire people that you can, quote unquote, surpass intellectually. I like to be the imposter. When I look at my team, I was like, you guys are great. So kind of work yourself out of the job. And the trick is they don't need you, and then you go do more scope, something else.
That's a nice point. So not only do you look for passion for when building your own teams, it's also important for you to land in an organization and see that by the C-suite and your hiring manager is what you're saying there.
I work hard. I've earned the right to be picky.
Yeah.
You're also stumbling against pretty complicated problems as well, right? So I heard a quote, some investor that says, I always ask the people, even though they have a great business plan, like how many sort of argument have you guys had? Can you resolve them, right? So I look for that sort of support system in my own leadership. We're gonna headbutt, that's fine, but are we headbutting with a mutual respect?
Yeah, thank you. So over the last couple of years, we've seen certainly the last 5, we've seen quite a volatile market in terms of just general hiring. And a golden thread of all this is that cybersecurity hiring and compliance and trust is very challenging. And especially when you're going after top teams, which is the panel discussion we're having today, and building like world-class security organizations. My company literally exists to help try and bridge that because it is so hard. So when you're thinking about going out that, we've just run through what some of your secret sources are as individuals, but now you've kind of identified the team that you want to build. You've seen opportunity and you know where kind of you want to get to, and you're in that kind of scale mode. I guess one of the questions I had is, in this competitive market that we find ourselves in, what do you do differently or commonly? What's like a common thread that you have between them when thinking about attracting and hiring security talent?
I think one of the things I typically do is a numerous of different things actually. One, sometimes we use sourcers, right? External sourcers. We also go after talent that we see in the market. So like going to conferences, seeing people speak, seeing them in their environment is really helpful, because then you can actually understand, is that a person that would fit with the culture and a person that we would want on the team? Meetups is another great way. I find that referrals are amazing because it comes with a level of authenticity that you actually know how they have performed in prior roles. So I do leverage networking quite a lot when trying to find new talent, because I think that the security world is a very small world. I think that when you go into a place, you typically know a few people. And so it is very easy to kind of like pull from those strings and actually pull the right kind of talent. And that's one way, because then you have the referral of both sides.
Yeah.
The referral for you as a leader to that person, and then from that other contact for you, right? And so it is a mutual agreement to say, oh, you know what, this is probably a good person to talk to. Doesn't always guarantee it's going to be a fit, but it's a starting point.
I think there are 2 things that I care about like a lot when I'm trying to hire, even like regardless of what the market is like it's probably a little bit easier to hire now than it was 2-3 years ago. But pretty much always I hire very slowly, but make sure I have the ability to close quickly. And the idea basically is like I only get a chance to basically sign somebody up for like a 1-ish plus year contract by talking to them for a few hours. It makes sense to me to be very selective about who I'm talking to and who I'm bringing through that process, such that we can like get the best assurance that we can possible by the time they get through on site that we're actually going to have somebody who will fit our needs and the culture, the team that already exists, etc. The other thing I do that I think takes candidates by surprise sometimes is I generally do my hiring manager screens early. I call them shoot the shit interviews, because I don't ask like questions really. I don't have like, give me an example of a time when type of stuff. It's like, just talk to me about you and like what you want to do. And let's talk about stuff that doesn't even have anything to do with work. For those of you that have not been on like a video call with me, my background is full of guitar amps and guitars and stuff, and that's half the time a topic of conversation, which is really interesting because it pulls us out of the work conversation, talking like, well, what do you want to do outside of work? What is your life like outside of, you know, the professional version of you? And that helps me very quickly get to a good understanding of like, is this person going to fit sort of the culture, components, or requirements that I have in my head, so that throughout the rest of the process, I can say, well, you know, ask them about this, or let's pull more on this, or they said X, Y, or Z in my first interview. Can we get more information on that? So between like hiring slow and being very selective, and maybe this is manipulative, but like disarming the candidate kind of right out of the gate, helps. I think it results in better interviews, in my opinion. It works a lot.
I think I kind of hear twofold to your question. One is the sourcing, one is the closing. And I think from the sourcing, great answers there. Maybe in addition, as a little bit, a little bit obsessive is, and I'm still, even though I lead engineering team, I'm still kind of geeky. I like to look at new things and so on. So I do spend a lot of time on GitHub. I just look at cool project and like who wrote it and just engage with them with no agenda beyond just, hey, I like what you're doing, how are you thinking about this, and so on. Sometimes it leads to a conversation that perhaps a year later you get a ping saying, hey, I'm kind of like looking for something else. So like a better term, I had a friend of mine who just played the long game. Maybe that's one trick, right? And then from a closure perspective, especially right now, and we've talked about like certain constraint in large company versus small company. At Granly, we're a small company. We have to be extremely, extremely selective. I don't talk about the job per se. I talk about my problems. I was like, this is like, I have problems right now of how do you manage multi-tenancy, enterprise level multi-tenancy in LLM? Like, I don't know how to solve this. Like, what do you think about this? And it just, as you mentioned, kind of diffuse the conversation from work, and it dives into the passion. And then that's where I see, can you go deep, right? What problem have you faced and so on. So that's how I generally look at closure and just make myself available. I've had several candidates tell me I haven't had a manager spend 3-4 hours with me towards the end. And I was like, listen, every time you talk to me about money, I'm going to cut you off. I'm not like, go talk to recruiting about money. I want to talk to you about the problem. And if you're interested, here's what you can learn and so on. So I'm actually talking about the problems. And sometimes I even open book as like, here's the laundry list of things that we're currently working on. Right? So that seems to pay dividend in finding that top talent, which is extremely hard. I would say it gets harder and harder.
Cool. That strikes a chord with me in particular because I've had so many experiences where I've interviewed for roles and it just felt like I was in a funnel for somebody and they're like, yeah, I'm just going to check some boxes and move you through and I might make you an offer. But this industry is so small, you're probably going to run into that person again at some point in time, and there's a good chance that might be your boss or something like that. So my approach when I'm talking to candidates is really like, can I have a relationship with you? Not just like, is this transactional? Can I hire you or not? It's happened so many times where, 2 companies later or whatever, that person's back in my pipeline, and maybe what we talked about last time has changed, or they've evolved, or they've been promoted, they've learned all these things, and now all of a sudden this person is a great fit and exactly what I'm looking for. And if 2-3 years ago, the last time I talked to them, it was a bad experience, or they felt like, like just another sheep, they're probably not going to come on to work for me. So, small industry, build a relationship with people, I think is super important.
I think you're all actually saying the same thing. Like what you're talking about there is just being a good person and being intentional with that interview process. And then if it's not the right fit for you or them at the right time, then kind of come back and I'll work on those things in the interim, which plays into what Sacha's saying, which is have a long-term view or vision of this, which to dovetail it back to Erika is about referrals, right? We all do a lot of business or make hires and transactions from our referral network. It's something we're very proud of and why kind of we're able to all build teams. And by not rushing in that first instance, but to try and get something in it for you or to make a quick hire, it's really impactful for longer term that you're willing to go out of your way to make a referral or a recommendation for a team member into your team.
I would say that adding on to what Sacha said, it's also about being transparent, right? About what they're getting when they come to you. Because I think in order to actually close a deal, you want to make sure that you both are on the same page, because you want them excited about the role just like you want to be excited about them joining. And so that transparency, obviously to an extent, you can't like air all your dirty laundry.
Of course not. No.
But being transparent that there are problems that you want them to help solve, or there are things that you want to innovate on to build out a new future of security. I think all of those things are what helps get that candidate excited and therefore hopefully be able to close that deal. But you have to be transparent about it, right? You can't just ask a bunch of questions like, tell me about time, because that's not going to get someone excited.
Yeah. So some of the key things we took from that then is referrals, in-person events. You talked about kind of meeting people there. We talked about interviewing slow, but hiring fast, having the ability to do that. And I know Sacha made a lot of good examples, but GitHub is a secret sauce for a lot of hiring managers. And I know that kind of a lot of technical engineering leaders, it's the first thing they'll do. They don't even want to see a resume, frankly. It's like, can you send me the GitHub? And they'll hire kind of based on that. Or maybe they've contributed in a project before and kind of comes full circle. And then the last thing is LLM security. Hasn't been mentioned today, other than it being a hard challenge to hire for as well. So
Yeah, you talk to someone at DeepMind that's been there for a long time, and he says, Sacha, I don't know how to solve it. And you have something interesting.
So some of the topics we've covered already has been around kind of what hiring managers look for, but it's also you can weave in as a candidate to go to events and use GitHub and be intentional with your job search as much as what new hiring managers kind of experienced hiring managers could do. There might be some, raise your hand if you're a new hiring manager in the room, if you've become new to hiring in the last 18 months. Anybody? Got one at the back. I won't point you out, but you're on your journey of being a new hiring manager. I think it's a lot of people in my network are maybe in the first like 12 to 18 months of building a team and they don't know where to start. And so I thought with a lot of experience at this table, I wanted to ask a question around that, which is what advice would you give to new leaders who are looking to build a security team and maybe it's their first hire or maybe it's their kind of, I don't know, they're building the first couple of hires. What advice would you give to leaders on that journey?
Start. So I think the first thing that I would do and what I would advise someone to do is to really map out what your plan is for your team, because you don't want to hire just any part of your team first. You want to be very strategic and very deliberate about that first hire, because sometimes it'll take a little bit of time to hire the rest of your team. You may lose funding during that time. So the order by which you hire and the order that you select which people you want to hire, which roles to hire for will be very, very critical, especially if you're building a team from scratch. So really understanding what it is that you have from an expectation perspective, like what are you trying to deliver for the business that you're supporting? And then also which role will help make the most impact and difference in that deliverable, so that you're being intentional.
I see that like you've done some things on your resume. We've talked a little bit about what you've done, but like walk me through how you approach that problem. Walk me through how you think about solving for these things, especially if the problem is large in scope and ambiguous in definition. Like help me understand your approach to these, because the approach is going to be more impactful, I think, than like, yeah, I totally did this in the past. Like it might have been super easy at the last place. Here it might be super hard in comparison. So how do you do the work? How do you go about this? And it's not just the technical, but like, how do you work with the people that you are going to have to work with? Like, what is it like to sit next to you or sit across from you or whatever? Like, help me understand that. It's been really, really quite influential in how I think about hiring people.
Yeah, first advice I would say is take your time. Generally, take your time. Get to know the person. Also understanding the constraint that you have and also what you need to fix now. For example, and you really kind of light up my head the other day about like the differences. And for example, you hire at Microsoft, you're playing long game, right? They are coaching, they will learn here and so on. Versus a small company, they need to hit the ground running. So you are acquiring talent, you are acquiring experience. You don't have time to go build it, right? So you look with somebody that can hit the ground running right away versus a prospect with really good potential. So understanding these constraints, but also take the time. Get to know the person. There's a great book called Who, which I highly recommend. Grantley's interview process is based on this book. It will guide you in terms of some of the signals to actually see and some of the questions to ask to dive a little bit deeper. Like, what was your previous job? Who was your manager? What would you say, that this manager did great, and what would you say this manager didn't do so great? So it gets you to really get to know the person more, I would say.
Very cool. So thank you for some of the wisdom you shared collectively so far. We've talked about hiring and attracting, right? So we've done that. Let's say you've now built an org that you're very proud of. There's always challenges that come with that as well, and I don't know, attrition and retaining talent is a skill. There's, as much as you're very passionate about what you're building internally and the technical challenges that your team get to work on, there's always going to be another company next door tapping on your teams and your talent. So I guess, what advice do you have, or how do you think about going about retaining teams individually?
I mean, I was gonna say this earlier, we probably could change this whole entire panel to just be about culture.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
I really think culture is the biggest part of retaining people. If people, this is maybe with the definition of culture, right? I think if people feel like they are around people they like to work with, working on things that are engaging, interesting, challenging problems, feel like they are able to operate the way that they want to operate, so they feel bounded, people will be pretty happy. Asterisk, right? The comp's not there, people eventually leave. If the rest of the company around them is not so awesome, that will also influence the culture of your team. But I think you can ride a long way on having a good culture, which is not like an easy answer. It takes a lot of work to maintain a good culture within your team, especially if you have to deal with headwinds external to your team. That's kind of my direct answer. The culture is the way to retain people. There's a lot of work that goes into it, a lot of nuance, there's a lot of complexity, but if you don't have that, people are.
Yeah, I think building off of that, because obviously I do believe in culture. I think that's the number one reason people leave is because of other people, right? They don't like their boss, or they don't like the people that they work for or with. And so I do think that it is why when we talked about hiring, that aspect was so important, because you want them to be able to work well together and collaborate. Not that there won't be friction sometimes, because I think that that's good. It's good to challenge one another, but it's challenging each other in a healthy way. And I think as leaders, one of our responsibilities is helping people to understand how to do that and how to do that in a healthy way. And so one of the things that I really focus my leadership team on is doing just that, right? It's helping to build that culture, but doing it in a way by which it's going to help to raise people up, because at the end of the day, not everyone, but most people want to grow in their careers. So you want to understand, like, where are they going? Where do they want to go? So that you can help navigate their career with them. Sometimes that's going to be at your company, sometimes it's not. But the most effective people are the happiest people, which means you want to help them grow, you want to help them get to where they want to go from a career standpoint. And then also encouraging each of your team members to build each other up is the other part of that, right? Because you're not alone in a team. A team is a team for a reason, right? It's not just you as a leader. And so having that encouragement, touching base. So if you are managing a team of 10, it's a lot easier to have that one-on-one. You're managing a team of 200. It gets a little bit more complicated, but having check-ins with your skip levels becomes very, very critical. Because if you don't know what's going on at the root of your organization, it could all fall apart, right?
Culture is super important. Let's be careful about not retention at all costs either. I think sometimes you have to enable people to spread their wings. I've had people on my team that told me they were departing, and I actually congratulated them because it was a nice leg up, right? One in particular became a CISO somewhere else and caught me off guard. Said, "Hey, I'd love to keep in touch with you. Congratulations!" And the person was very surprised. So I don't believe in retention at all costs, and that tend to lead people staying longer, right? Be a servant for your team. Go fight, right? Don't back down. Go fight. Pick your fight wisely. I think if they see that the leadership is actually supporting them and growing them, and you've built a great culture of healthy disagreement rooted in trust. The trust part is super important. It takes time to build. You have to invest time, spend time outside of work, and so on. But for me, I don't believe in retention at all costs. So I think there's a fine line there that's hard to navigate. And you just congratulate them. So you want to treat them the best, and you don't want to make sure they don't feel locked down, per se.
Yeah, I think a lot of those answers resonate with a lot of the crowd. There's a lot of nodding going on there for sure. But we talk about trust, culture, we talk about collaboration, and all these things, I agree entirely, add to building top teams and helping them to retain. But it becomes challenging in the world that we find ourselves in. It's amazing to be in rooms like this and conferences, but we do work in a distributed workforce. I'm distributed, a lot of my team are, and it's challenging. So how, as leaders, do you think about building a culture of trust and collaboration in a distributed workforce?
And then for us, we actually have virtual fun days sometimes with my team. And that helps to get people into a more social, because when we talk about getting to know people on a personal level, it's not always about work. And so we would have these virtual happy hours, which would allow us to have a drink at home, but actually socialize virtually. I also do encourage my team to get together every year, once a year, in an in-person situation, even though we're distributed across the entire US. And that's because I do think that in-person coordination is also very helpful. Sometimes from a budget standpoint, you can't always do that.
Yeah.
So sometimes you do have to get creative. Also encouraging pods, right? Where you have groups of people that are congregated together in different states, encourage them to get together, right? I think it is about, when you talk about building trust, it's about trying to help with that socialization, because one of the things that you miss out on when you don't have this in person is kind of like the water cooler talk and just talking about things that are not necessarily strictly work related, and back-to-back meetings can be exhausting. So allowing some space to have some of that water cooler talk that's not necessarily structured is sometimes really, really helpful. Another idea is remote coffee chats. So you get paired with different people in the organization, and you can actually then meet someone new that you've never met before. It encourages getting to know one another. It encourages understanding someone else's role and how they operate, which then helps you in the long run.
Love that.
Yeah, I do a lot of the kind of the same thing. It's really important for me that the people that are within my organization and really external to my organization as well are engaged with each other as people, and that doesn't entirely revolve around the problem they're trying to solve or the technical skills they have. It's a pretty safe assumption that everybody has interests that are not work. It's also a pretty safe assumption that most people like to have fun. So I will. We have a channel in my organization. It's a whole entire org, and the only rule is no work talk. It's just pure shit posting all the time, and it's active all the time throughout the day, every single day of the week. And there's lulls, and you can kind of tell when people get off on okay, we've been talking about Taylor Swift now for 3 hours. But it brings those people together. And I agree with you on the in-person thing. I think in-person is really, really important. Try to do it more than once a year, but budgets and stuff. But I try to facilitate as many of those types of situations where people can come together and be people together, not necessarily try to solve problems all the time. Every Friday we have optional mandatory fun time, which is 50% attendance, but we just get in there and do whatever, and talk about whatever we want to talk about. No one's working after 2 p.m. on a Friday anyways, so.
Hey.
No one asterisk.
But the idea is bring people together to do people things that are not revolving around work, and it helps build kind of stronger bonds with your team. I've realized kind of flattens the management structure in those types of situations, so it's also very helpful.
I'm part of the audience here because I struggle with it. We talk about geo-distribution, but there's a difference between people, for example, geo-distributed within a particular time zone versus, I was describing leading a team in Dubai and India and UK and New York, and all at the same time, right? So I don't know. I think what seems to work is in-person time. So I happen to be working at a company that has this remote hybrid where we do have actually in-person time once a quarter, a week, everybody in different locations. I personally, I'm always transparent. I personally think we try to squeeze too much meetings and so on, where we should just let it breathe more. And then also think through about the geo-distribution of your team and project, right? I hate the single Tom pattern, a single person in a region working on a project where everybody else is in a different region. You're gonna go test trust there. There's gonna be frustration. So sometimes you are constrained, but think also about it may not be the best setup in terms of skill set, right? But they together close, they move better. So think through about the geo-distribution of your project, specifically when you start dealing, Amazon was insane, just heavily distributed. Also, as a manager, don't kill yourself, which I've made the mistake several times. My wife is in the audience, she reminds me. 5 a.m. meetings up to 6, 7 p.m. meetings. So focus on your health as well, but generally think through about the distribution of your project. That tends to help a lot.
One of the things that Kevin said there as well, really kind of brought it back home to how I've tried to do it over the time, because it's hard, is the kind of mandatory fun thing. I know it was a cheeky comment, but it's not always on you as a leader or a hiring manager or I don't know, if I run a practice to do that. You want to try and allow other people to take that mantle on and do different things. And I used to try and organize something and it just felt forced. And then you start allowing the team members, every new team member that comes to join the company, they have to run a quarterly event, which is scary for them, especially if they're an introvert, to organize something. And somebody's running a paint and sip in a matter of weeks. Last week we did a health challenge, which was most steps. And then we shared pictures of our dogs in the channel. Then we started on Slack the dogs of Code Red, which started off as a real cool thing because we're all passionate about our dogs, and now it's just shit talking and having a bit of fun on a different Slack channel. So we also have that channel internally.
To your point, and something I do is, if you as a leader is not there, what happens? I love taking vacation and see what's broken when I come back, right? So, for example, right now I have a team in Germany. I do know they spend quite a bit of time together. Even we have someone in Poland that travels to Berlin, and I order approve all these expenses, right? But I know they're spending time together organically. That's a good sign of health and trust. If that didn't happen, then I would fly there more frequently and try to set this up, right? So even though you're a lead, I don't like forcing people to spend time together. That's just not me.
No. I'll give an example. So I took all of my engineering managers to an offsite. I needed to train them on several different aspects of their job and their role. Some things that were changing. But I had an event after hours because I made them work so long, and I believe in nature, so I love to get everyone out in nature. So we went and did a kayaking excursion. Now, it was open to everyone to go, but I wasn't upset if they did not go, because what happens is that some people are really into the activity and some people aren't. As long as they're kind of like congregating and actually getting to know each other. So half the people went on the kayaking, and then the other half just kind of stayed at the hotel and hung out, got to know each other, played games, did stuff together. And to me, that's still super powerful, right? You don't have to make them hang out together in a forced way, but you should allow for the time for them to be able to get together in a way by which allows them to grow. Now, some people went on the kayak and were like, I thought I was going to hate it, but I loved it. So I do encourage people to get outside of their comfort zone sometimes. But I think that goes to show, like, you can always do little things. Some people will join, some people won't. And I think that's okay, right? Because it allows for the opportunity. Like, I came to Seattle. You don't have a building in Seattle, but I have team members here. I opened it up for a hike in the morning and dinner at night. I had people go on a hike with me in the morning. Some people join me for dinner. And so I think that it just gives the opportunity. It opens it up. And I think that's part of it, right? It's allowing the opportunity for people to actually get to know each other, which then helps to build out that happiness.
And build that foster that kind of nature where they like Sacha was talking about as well, which is when you're not in the room or when you're on PTO, that they're doing these things because they want to, right? Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you all for sharing your experiences, a lot of wisdom. We actually do have some time left to ask some questions to our panel. So I'd like to throw it out. Is there anybody else in the crowd that would have a question? We've got one over there. You're gonna have to speak up. Unfortunately, we don't have a physical. Maybe we do. Or if you wouldn't mind asking the question loud, we'll be able to do it.
Yeah, I can do that. My question around like retaining talent is, what do you think about the effectiveness of counter offers? Because people are generally leaving a company. Sometimes it's for money, but sometimes it's because of burnout. It's because they're working with jerks or something else. And making a counter offer, giving them more money, maybe a different title doesn't always fix the problem why they were going to leave. So they probably leave another year later when the extra money isn't fixing that problem.
So the question that I heard was counter offers. How does that play into retention, and generally, how would our hiring managers approach counter offers?
Well, how effective do you think they really are in the long run? I mean, again, because people are probably leaving the company not just because of money. There's probably something else going on. And if you offer them more money, that doesn't necessarily fix the underlying reason they were leaving.
Yeah. Well, I'll take a stab at that to start with, if you don't mind. I've been in staffing for 15 years, and there is a pretty well-known industry stat that the chances of somebody staying past a year of receiving a counteroffer and accepting it, the higher percentage is that person's gone anyway, because it's not money, right? They can maybe get an extra 5-10% on salary, but what it is you've already covered most of these tracks, which is culture and values and being respected by your team members and your colleagues. So just from I haven't built my own security teams, but I've got a lot of experience in recruiting, and that stat is wonderful because it really does tell a truth about counteroffers. You're looking externally because you want to leave, not for an extra 5 or 10%.
Yeah, it's very rare that they actually are super highly effective. Generally speaking, it is usually like a year, and if you don't solve that underlying problem, which typically you probably can't because it's probably culture or it's probably who they work with, right? Because again, I go back to most of the time, people don't leave a company because of money. Most of the time, they leave because of culture or people or something that just doesn't feel right about the role itself.
Yeah, counter offers are not effective in my opinion. Pretty bluntly.
But you're assuming the counter offer is only money based. Some counter offers is scope too and title.
Yeah.
So don't forget that. I actually mentioned an EVP one time because I was leaving, and they gave me a counter. Well, I wasn't leaving for another company. I was just like, I'm gonna go surfing for like whatever 8 months. I'm burned out, right? And they put money down and they actually transferred directly to my account even before I knew, right? And the person said, like, do you feel overpaid? I was like, that's extremely generous, right? And he's like, at least we got that out of the way. I was like, it doesn't resolve the problem, right? So I ask every candidate the same question. What are you not getting where you're at now that you're looking for? Right? Sometimes it's money. I've worked with a company for a long time where I was being offered twice as much money as elsewhere. It was tempting, but I still stuck around for a couple of years. Why? Because I loved the toys I was playing with, and I had my own single office with a nice mountain view, right, for a long time. You and I were briefly discussing about that earlier. So sometimes it's a little bit about money, but I tend to agree. The counters are not there. I think there's two cases where a counter did work, but it wasn't about that. Is the person was extremely hungry and frustrated. So go fix that. Right?
Also, counteroffers are temporary, right? It fixes the compensation for a brief time, not long term. Usually it's not a long-term benefit, and therefore it leaves a desire to want them again in some other form or fashion. And so, but I do agree, it is interesting about the scope one. You're right, you could offer it with a scope, but the question is why didn't you offer it before?
Well,
and then are you putting them in a position by which they won't be successful?
I had a recent case where it was pretty obvious. The company just threw the kitchen sink, but the person told me they weren't joining because of the scope. We never discussed about money because we shook hands on the financial side of things, and I actually congratulated him. I was like, I don't mind losing to that. That's a great counter, and it was all about scope. Yeah.
We've got time for maybe one more question. Sure. Hey.
So I really enjoyed the discussion about trust and culture and passion. And these are things that are the bedrock of high performance teams. But the world sometimes intercedes, right? And it challenges us with layoffs, with impacts from company culture, with external teams, from things that we fight for, but then we lose, right? We have to disagree and commit. So how are you intentional about retention in the face of that kind of serial action on your team and complications?
It's interesting, and I think that Kevin was actually alluding to this. There's culture for the company that you work for, and then there's culture within your team.
Yeah.
And the reason why I'm clarifying that is because you're absolutely right. Sometimes there's outside factors that make it really, really hard to have your team trust you or to trust that they are going to be productive in their roles. Whether that is because of a layoff, whether that is because of some other factor that the company is kind of like pushing into the organization. But it still always comes back to building that trust. And I find being transparent, talking about it, not hiding from it, right? Hitting it straight on. Because at the end of the day, they're all people that work for you, right? If you cannot be transparent, obviously you can't tell everything. Sometimes as a leader, sometimes you know information before another part of the team, and that is what it is. But being as transparent as possible and being just genuine. Like I think that when you are genuine with your team, that shows through. When you're not, that also shows through. And that helps to combat some of the things that you can't control. Although what's interesting is when we talk about culture, if you start to feel like that culture is not good, then the question is really, should you still be there too, right? So I think that there is the culture change. As long as you're feeling good about that culture, you should be able to sell that culture to the rest of the company, even if there's things that happen like from the way our industry is now, right? There's been a lot of challenges like layoffs with many, many, many companies. That is almost everywhere. There's just financially like hardships, right? But I think you can pull your team through that by just talking to them.
Yeah, I agree with Erika. 1 minute wrap up. Great. I think the thing I would have there is my approach to managing my teams is like to be very genuine, to be very transparent, to be very candid with these people. Like they're surrounded by other adults. Like you need to treat them like kids. I think you're gonna have in a weird position if you do. And so throughout the course of working with these other professionals and treating them like professionals all the time, when the external things that happen that you can't control happen, It's not, you don't have to then turn around and be like, we'll totally not do another one of these, trust me. Like, it just doesn't work. So if something like that happens and you can kind of consume it and figure out like what's the path forward through this and give people some sense of a stability as you're navigating like very tumultuous thing like a riff or a layoff or something like that, you already have some built-in credibility. And not everybody is, has that sort of luxury. Sometimes people land and there's immediately a layoff. It's like, oh, you just have to kind of trust that I'm gonna be transparent with you. But like I sort of like plan for worst case scenario, hope for best case scenario. Like when I'm managing my teams, I think that really helps. Because then when the uncertainties do come, people are gonna at least say like, well, I trust the person I'm working for. It might have been affected by the leadership above them, but there's at least somebody I can hold on to while we're navigating these things. And it just feels like a responsibility of mine to people that work for me.
I just build a culture of transparency and honesty. Also, in the case of layoff, I'm a direct guy. So I went to perhaps a CEO and said, hey, I think this is the right decision. Let's make sure people that are still around don't think the reward is keeping their job. Right? And be very blunt there. And what are we going to go do? Because they see the wave of more work. We have less people, more work, harder problems. What are we doing about this? The reward is not keeping their job. Every single person in my team can go find a job anywhere else, right? So just treat it the same way as well. Just to address like the counter I mentioned, I've worked in an organization where perhaps compensation needs to be revisited globally, and that takes time. So uncomfortable, risky situation as a manager, but I did ask the person, I need you to help me help you. What does that mean? I need you to help me with more data so I can help you and the others. So you send out your folks out there and get those counter offers. Right? You build a lot of trust that way. Sorry, it's disruptive, but you build long-term trust like that.
Good stuff. Well, I think we all I personally feel very fortunate to have shared a panel this afternoon with so much thought leadership, experience, and wisdom, but also kind of delivered in a candid approach. I think it's really refreshing. So would you mind raising a round of applause for our wonderful panelists this afternoon? Thank you. Thank you all for listening. Really appreciate it.